Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. Today we have special guest Greg Shanahan joining me in the studio. Welcome along, Greg.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Now, you head up the TIN network,
Yes.
Technology Investment Network,
Yes.
actually. Sorry, I've put a double N there and
Yep.
completely messed it up.
No.
Before we get started, tell people what is the Technology Investment Network and what is this TIN report that you've recently released?
So the TIN report is a report on New Zealand's largest globally focused technology companies in the area of ICT, high-tech or high-value manufacturing and biotechnology. So these are companies that have originated in New Zealand and have offshore revenue or quote-unquote exports of at least 10% of their revenue. So they're companies that are taking Kiwi ideas and solutions to the world.
Fantastic.
And the TIN report, essentially, so we curate that community through publications. Every year we produce a large report called the TIN report, as you pointed out, that quantifies the progress of the sector and measures a whole lot of metrics on those companies, so we can really get a barometer of how that sector is going. The data is collected by surveys, so this year we surveyed just under 1,000 companies, compared to, say, 70 companies that we surveyed in 2005 when we started the report.
Wow, so things have come a long way over those the last decade and a half.
They certainly have.
Yeah, that's great, and the numbers are really impressive, right? So let's delve into that a little bit. Let's get started, because what I want to do with this episode of the show, we haven't done a segment on the TIN report before. But I guess as I've got a little bit familiar with technology investment over the last little while, particularly working with TIN as a customer of Gorilla, and starting to get to know yourself and a few of the folks, it has really stood out to me how important it is that we start looking at our successes and drilling in and learning from those successes. And I think the success actually of our tech sector, and particularly when you look at it in terms of from an export perspective, I think is probably snuck up on people. I think a lot of people will be surprised at just how strong New Zealand is as a tech exporter. And I saw the headline in the Herald last week talking and calling out what you had highlighted, which is if the growth that the tech exports have had to date continues, and I think you've said it's 2 out of the last 3 years we've seen $1 billion worth of growth in export from our top tech companies. Yeah,
so the combined revenues for the top 200 companies for 3 out of the past 4 years have been over $1 billion.
And where does that position us tech right now versus tourism and dairy, which are the top two, right?
Yeah, so it positions, in terms of revenue from outside of New Zealand, it was just under $9 billion. Tourism was around $11 billion. And dairy was around about 15. So only $2 billion under tourism. So even for an Irish mathematician such as myself, had $1 billion a year within 2 years, if the tourism sector flatlines as it did last year, then will be at least equivalent to tourism. But the scope is that what we're seeing, and for many companies, is exponential growth. So unlike dairy, this growth is not resource constrained in terms of land use or other factors. The most significant things that we've got to do to continue the growth is to latch more deeply into the talent pools within New Zealand and continue to get the growth in investment that the sector's currently seeing.
Yeah, and look, it's not that we want to see the dairy industry or the tourism, sector slow down, because that stuff's good for New Zealand as long as things are kept in balance in terms of how we look after our incredible and beautiful country. But there is certainly that potential within a short space of time, within the next 5 years. It's quite possible that tech could be our number one exporter.
Oh,
as a
absolutely,
country.
Every year the data becomes stronger to indicate that in terms of what we're seeing, particularly this year, and I've seen a growing trend, is we're getting actual critical mass. So this is now a thing. It's a major force. There are 3 companies with revenues over $1 billion, Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, to celebrate their 50th anniversary, past a $1 billion threshold.
Fantastic.
There are over 50 companies with revenues over 50 million, something like 8 with revenues over 200 million. So increasingly, it's defined by a lot of large companies, and then at the bottom, the pyramid is expanding. So the number of startups continues to grow. So there's nothing about it that's saying this growth will slow down anytime soon.
Now, I'll just put this in there because I meant to include it at the top of the show. This Friday, I'm doing a little talk for any of our listeners and viewers, because we're also live streaming this on one or two channels. I'll be doing the keynote at the PwC Herald Talks. Now, the title of that is The Tech Revolution, and where that really ties into the TIN report is that I think that the TIN 200 shows us just how well our technology companies are doing. But on the flip side, what I see is that a lot of our non-tech companies are, you could say, far too non-tech for their own good. So, often what I'm seeing is as my team are doing audits of smaller to medium New Zealand businesses, is that the technology that we're actually using is leaving us behind the 8 ball and not in the ideal position. So anyone that wants to hear a little bit about that and how we can be applying the same punching above our weight success that we're seeing on an export front in the tech sector to the rest of our businesses. That's happening Friday morning at that breakfast event. So little shout out for the PwC Herald Talks event.
Awesome.
But getting back to the TIN report, Greg, maybe you can talk to us about the regions, because the New Zealand Tech Podcast, although I live in Auckland today, and so most often that's I guess what I get the closest view on, spending most of my year here. But I grew up most of my time in the South Island, and I'm very interested, and I think our audience is interested in knowing, how are we doing as a whole, as a country?
We spoke previously about this. I genuinely believe that New Zealand has a shot at utopia, which sounds like a pretty naive thing to say. But essentially, we're a pretty small economy, and so it doesn't require a very large stone to make a big splash and change things fundamentally. So that applies to the regions. So the exciting thing for those listening to this outside of Auckland is the growth isn't limited to Auckland. In fact, some of the strongest growth figures are coming from outside of Auckland, places like Dunedin, Otago and Southland, like Wellington, and increasing growth in Canterbury. So across the country, there's a democracy of opportunity, and that's because talent is everywhere. So if you can democratise the opportunity to expose it to the talent that's in our country, no one cares where that talent resides or who they are.
That's right. I guess what we're seeing is the whole world is getting flatter in a sense, and certainly New Zealand from that perspective of being able to work from anywhere, and we have such good connectivity here in New Zealand that you don't have to actually be sitting in an office at HQ and so on, or you don't have to actually have your business based in a large centre anymore. You can literally do this stuff from anywhere, and we've got businesses from all the places you mentioned,
Yes.
Wanaka,
Yeah.
and all over. Whereas in the past you wouldn't expect to see an exciting tech exporter being based in some of these locations. But actually, I was talking to somebody about Wanaka the other day, and they said, "Boy, sign me up if there's a job going in a place like that. I would love to get out of the rat race and enjoy that lifestyle and beautiful New Zealand and still specialise and do an incredible job from that part of the country."
Yeah, if you look at a company like Shuttle Rock that's involved in digital media based in Nelson, or Magic Memories in Queenstown, or Straker with their office in Gisborne, or Mackay Engineering based up in Whangarei. So these are highly ambitious companies going global. And so the benefit that they have is that the lifestyle for their employees in these locations, as it is for all of us in New Zealand, is incredible. So I think it's not a case so much of New Zealand trying to bring itself up to the levels of offshore, but coming to understand that we actually have huge advantages here that can't be achieved in other countries for some of those things. So we've got an unparalleled quality of life. We're a diverse nation, so accepting women or migrants or Māori, Pacifica, Indigenous people into the workforce is not an issue. We welcome diversity. And there's an enormous amount of transparency in New Zealand that doesn't exist in larger societies. And there's a directness around our communication and an integrity as being part of a small society that actually gives us incredible advantages in terms of cost-effectively developing solutions, and on the marketing side, becoming trusted quite quickly by offshore customers.
Yeah, that's very cool. What you mentioned transparency there.
Yeah.
Why does New Zealand stand out in those regards?
I think that's just our sort of small culture. Everybody knows each other, and so therefore there's no fogginess about generally what our intent is. And if you look at the kinds of language we use compared to other countries, so if you look at in a development environment, there's the rule of the two pizza rule that Google have. In other words, they don't want a development team that it takes more than 2 pizzas to feed. And so once you get beyond that, you get inefficiencies. And so for most companies, they actually can't afford to feed more than people, enough people to eat two pizzas. So it's kind of the sweet spot in terms of speed of development. And the sector's replete with stories of companies that have done developments for a fraction of the cost that their larger competitors might have done.
Yeah, I think you're right. I've certainly heard those things, and there's very much just a get it done and can do attitude here in New Zealand, and there's something special about our small organisations that can go out and do amazing things, while there might be a big business in another part of the world that's struggling with exactly that thing. And I've spoken a little bit about Rocket Lab recently, but I think Rocket Lab is an incredible example, and Peter Beck with just his dedication, his tenacity, his futurist and tech revolutionary sort of mindset has really looked ahead over quite a number of years, and now we're in this position where what they're doing is mind-blowing. You look around the world, there's dozens, if not hundreds of other companies trying to get rockets up into space.
Yes.
And there's Rocket Lab just going away and doing it very successfully, and now iterating on that and working out how to do it better and faster and cheaper. Yet they're already leading the world.
Oh, absolutely. And so I think the great thing about New Zealand, and if you look at the tin companies, is ambition and success is contagious. so that people are looking at guys like Peter Beck or what Rod Drury did with Xero and other companies and saying, well, we can do that too. And I think the other advantage that living in an environment like New Zealand gives is you've got clarity of thought. So we lead a simpler life, and so we can come up with creative solutions. There's all sorts of data in terms of sociological or psychological data that points out that stress is an inhibitor of creativity. So we have the freedom to think about these things, not whether or not there's going to be a gunman at the school of our children, or if the guy at the bus stop is actually high on something. Issues around personal safety and security and trust are not major issues in New Zealand in the way that they might be in other societies.
Yeah, that's actually it's an interesting thought. I hadn't really drilled into that aspect, but when I look at our lifestyle, and I remember quite a few years ago, a friend coming back to New Zealand from London, and we were in Auckland, which it's the biggest city I've lived in New Zealand, and I've been spent a little bit of time in other cities around the world. He's saying, "Oh, Paul, it's such a slow pace here. I could never live here," now with that mindset, where it might be a little bit slower to New York or London, but actually that brings a huge benefit, doesn't it? In terms
absolutely.
of the hours that people sort of spend commuting and so on, it certainly becomes a whole lot easier, and just the lifestyle in New Zealand. You're never too far from some gorgeous beaches, water you can use, or mountains to climb, and so on, right?
And you would have
it's got to have an impact.
Absolutely, and you would have thought, and not to be complacent or gloating, that in a lot of the areas that New Zealand companies are succeeding, in the major markets, particularly in the United States, this is mission central stuff, and someone else would have eaten that lunch long before they turned up. So if you looked at digital media as an example, so the companies in our report are enjoying phenomenal growth, approaching combined revenues of about $1 billion. And on the production end, you've got Weta Digital, one of the top 4 FX companies in the world. And then on the distribution end, you've got Vista Group, which is number 1 in multi-cinema entertainment complex management solutions globally.
Yeah, I mean,
so that's bracketed the whole thing.
Incredible story, isn't it? Vista, and another mention there. If you are interested in hearing about some of these companies, Vista is one of the ones, as is Rocket Lab and a bunch more on the New Zealand Business Podcast. Those stories it's just so inspiring to hear them, and when they're broken down, it's like this it seems like just normal everyday things happening, but you put that Kiwiness into the picture, the tenacity, the creative thinking, and all of those bits and pieces that come together and are uniquely New Zealand, and obviously some incredibly talented and hard-working individuals, but then over a reasonably short space of time, you end up with these incredible global successes.
Yeah, I think that, and I guess we're fortunate in terms of we're in sort of Goldilocks zone for doing this stuff that's not of our own making, but I think one of the key advantages historically that New Zealand has had is that we've had to use technology to overcome poor economies of scale. And that's probably no more evident than in the fintech sector, where we pioneered use of automatic teller machines, ATMs, and internet payments and online transactions, because we didn't have the overhead of massive number of branches across the country for the small population. It didn't make sense. So we've been very good at creating efficiencies in terms of customer service or business management or agriculture or production, simply because we didn't have the numbers in terms of the economy, and we didn't have large pools of very cheap labour. So New Zealand companies have turned to technology before their competitors overseas to solve those problems, which is why the tech sector, in terms of in the agri-tech space, stands to be a real boon, and is a real boon for the agricultural sector.
What are the other sectors that are have been exciting? What's the report shown in terms of the other areas where we're really doing well with technology?
So in terms of new sectors, the two that I mentioned, fintech and digital media, have been really key. But at the higher end, healthcare or health tech is now the number one sector, and we've again got a growing stable of companies there. And so we spoke about Fisher & Paykel Healthcare. They set an example for the rest of the sector in terms of the benefits of recurring revenue. So 90% of their revenue comes from existing customers. So it's the same model pretty much, or similar model, as adopted by Xero and other companies with software as a service. So the certainty, the ability to raise debt, your forecasting, your spend on marketing, it costs 6 times as much money to acquire a new customer as it does to keep it. All of that logic plays through, so it plays to the strengths of the New Zealand company. But behind Fisher & Paykel Healthcare are companies like Douglas Pharmaceuticals, AFT, Aroa, Arands, Atlantis Healthcare. In fact, if you start your company with an A, I think it's a very good idea to be in the healthcare sector. And so we're seeing within these high growth sectors, it's not one company, it's a whole stable of companies coming through. And we're doing some really cool stuff in the healthcare sector. And so I think that the next step, and I work with I've started a company in the healthcare sector, so it's total self-promotion. But I think the stage is ripe for New Zealand companies to take out large chunks of major markets, as opposed to necessarily playing on the fringes. That doesn't mean to say you have to commoditize yourself, but looking at large addressable markets and finding an unfair advantage and solving that problem with technology, but using the sort of the Kiwi way in terms of the way that we give service to retain and grow that customer base. I think the world's really ripe with opportunities in that area.
Yeah, I agree. And gaming is an area where we've seen this rise as well. I mean, it's quite small in the overall scheme of your total report. I think maybe it's around 1% off the top, between 1% and 2%. But we're seeing some really, really strong growth there.
Yeah, so I mean, grinding gear games is probably the most. Who knew of grinding gear games before they were bought? But a hugely successful companies like Pickpock, Ninja Kiwi, Cerebral Fix. There's a growing number, and so there's increasing examples of companies that have actually become quite successful and quite profitable.
Yeah, I'm certainly looking forward to sharing some more of those stories on future episodes, because often it goes unnoticed what's actually going on, but there's some amazing stories and inspiration. I think there's a lot that we can learn from those that have been there and done that, but not. I guess what I find most interesting are those that are doing it sort of right now. It's good to hear the stories of companies that had their success 10 or 20 years ago. But I often think, because things move so quickly, the most valuable are those new those fresh stories, or the ones where they're partway on their journey.
Oh, absolutely. And so if you take that within the tinned perspective, so we have a group called the EY 10 Companies to Watch. So these are the 10 companies with the highest dollar value revenue growth. And you thought, well, that's kind of unfair because it favours a bigger company. So if I'm a company turning over, $1 billion and I grow by 1% or 10%, whatever, it's quite a big number. But in fact, so those top 10 companies have revenues of $4 billion and growing about 20% per annum, pretty much all of them. Some a lot more, so you're getting companies increasing their revenue by tens of millions of dollars. And so they accounted for over 50% of the entire growth. But then underneath that are companies in the next 100 group, which are revenues between 3 to 20 million, with just a whole swath of new companies coming through, some known, well-known, and some not so well-known, that are recording some of the highest growth rates that we've seen. So companies like Soul Machines or EasyVet or Howick Limited and Plexure, across a real diversity of opportunities. So I think New Zealanders need to understand this is really a thing, and it's coming to a town near you. And coming back to the point that you made earlier, it's engaging with all of our societies. So we 3 years ago started a section prompted by a really smart woman called Robin Kamera to profile Māori companies in the report.
Yeah, this is fantastic.
And we kind of thought, well, it's a good thing to do, not, hope it's got longevity. But in the time that, with the 3 years that we've been doing that, the number of companies that were profiled has pretty much doubled. Last year, the revenue, combined revenue of those companies grew by 20%. You've got a growing number of aspirational Māori entrepreneurs, people like Grant Straker with Straker Translations. He's listed on the ASX. He's put his office in Gisborne to make it more achievable for his staff to own houses, rejuvenating the local economies.
Oh, very, very innovative.
Yeah, hugely inspirational. And so
yeah.
when Tin is not the architect of this, we're just a fan, trying to quantify what's going on. So, the kind of motivation for the Tin report is really twofold. One is to quantify the sector and say it is a thing. And I kind of think back to the conversations I had before this. All of us, I think, have spoken to people we've met at the family barbecue at Christmas that had no clue, and were actually quite misinformed. So we firstly wanted to make it a thing, and quantify it so that people could see if that thing was getting better, and we're fortunate it has. And then the second most important thing is to define what success looks like. Because I think there's no one path to success, but the confines of where we are and how big we are and all those things, there are a lot of commonalities in the success stories of Kiwi companies. And if we can do that and make it transparent and inspire others, that's a good thing.
Yeah, so where to from here? What else do we need to be thinking about so that we keep this trajectory? And I guess part of it for me is how do we get our next generation coming through to be aware of how exciting and interesting it is to work in the tech sector. How do we make sure we've got the right sort of folks coming through? Because a constant thing I hear is that we don't have enough of the right sort of experienced people. And look, there's probably a whole bunch of reasons for that. When things are growing at the scale they're growing at, you can't always sort of dip into a local pool of people. And I think there are great benefits that we get as a country from drawing in experts from around the world to join us, and those Kiwi expats that have spent time in other parts of the world and then come home and bring incredible expertise, having worked for some of the the biggest and brightest firms in the world, and then bringing that home to help grow and to move forward our local economy. But what's on your mind in terms of the things we need to do as we, if we look further out and to prepare for that?
I think that these businesses rely on talent to grow. It's the most important thing. And so New Zealand needs to remain a place where talent wants to live. So addressing issues of any economic or social dislocation or environmental degradation are critical for business. to be successful. It's far more efficient to tap into local talent pools than external, for all the obvious reasons. We're investing a lot of money in these people. And so there's certainly no lack of or inequalities in terms of talent. There are some inequalities in terms of opportunity. And so the tech sector has to engage in its communities, and particularly to attract parts of the communities that haven't so far been engaged with that. So particularly in Māori and Pacifica migrant communities, and more women in the tech sector. What we're looking to do is tend to assist that. It's looking to establish with partners already working in the space, so we're not trying to reinvent the wheel or pretend there was a problem that no one was trying to solve, but get young, talented students from particularly Decile 1 schools as interns in these high-growth companies in the early year 8 or 9 before they get too heavily into their teenage years, to change their horizons and give them confidence that this is the kind of thing that they would do, as opposed to this is not something that we don't do because my brother or my father or my mother hasn't done this.
Yeah, I like that approach.
And even bypassing, not suggesting that they should, but even bypassing tertiary institutions if that was a barrier. And so if we can sidestep those issues and work with the communities to support that, it's I think it's like a once in a lifetime, once in a generational opportunity to address entrenched economic disparity. And I think it's achievable. But I also think if you look at tech CEOs, all of us, every Kiwi is concerned about the environment. And so in the way that tech companies are an exemplar in terms of the way to run a business, I think they can make a contribution in terms of being custodians for our environment for all the reasons that we've discussed.
Yeah.
And so we can achieve a cohesion, which we have already, not as a society. I think we're incredibly cohesive in a way that doing some extraordinary things that make New Zealand an example for the rest of the world. And that's something I think we all want to be part of.
Definitely, I think everyone wants to make sure that New Zealand's in a good state and on a long-term basis, and if we can get these things right, then it does, really set us up for our future. But I guess we're on that sort of point where we could fall one way or we could fall the other way, and I guess it's a matter of, well, it's not falling, is it? It's we've got to take the actions that sets New Zealand up for that really strong future. And then we can really deal with some of the challenges that we experience right now, that that politicians are sort of drilling in on.
Yes.
But of course, if we can accelerate our growth and the revenue coming into the country through the tech genius that we have here, it's spread right around the country. If we can really get that right, those issues that we're trying to deal with, it's going to be a whole lot easier. Just imagine if our economy was to start sliding backwards, it gets a whole lot harder then to be doing things that are right for the environment, addressing
Absolutely.
some of those issues, housing and poverty type things and inequality. So I'm in the same boat as you. Let's keep this stuff moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think. And I think people say, the issue is why you don't have migrant communities or Māori and Pacifica kids or women in business. It's quite a complex thing. It is, I'm sure it is. But you've got a whole bunch of companies that are very familiar. You talk about expanding, becoming the leader in accounting software globally against massive competitors. It's pretty complex. You talk about putting a rocket into space with no space industry in New Zealand, or creating a film industry in Wellington, of all places, where could be less probably like, well, it used to be less like Hollywood than you could ever imagine. You've got ambitious people who execute well and understand the nuances of many of these hard problems. So in many ways, I think if we didn't do this, it would be stealing defeat from the jaws of victory. And we as a country have more opportunity, a far better chance at succeeding with this than most other Western countries. And so the exciting thing I think about the report, the sector now employs, those 200 companies alone employ over 50,000 people. The dairy sector in New Zealand employs 40,000 people. So that 50,000 number is global, but it's significant. There's $4 billion of wages going back into the economies that those people are employed in. So it's already got momentum and making a difference. And so I think, the opportunity to discuss this with you is fantastic in terms of, I'm grateful for the opportunity in terms of, I think we as a group, I and Tin don't have all the answers. But we as a society have got to say, what does success look like? And what are the things that we've got to execute on to enable that success? Because we've got something pretty special here. And I think everyone who's had the opportunity to grow up in New Zealand or come to New Zealand appreciates that. So if we can harness that goodwill, we can do a lot.
We can. It's not all necessarily easy. I think there's a hard road ahead. Now, who is it who reads the Tin report? Who are you trying to get it out to? This is, obviously there's a business behind the Tin report. You don't just, spend the year building it to, not do anything with it. So what does your business model look like? How does that work?
So our business model is, so the people who read the report, and we've been, like a lot of businesses, evolving what our model actually is over time. I think it really started as a work of passion looking for a business model, and probably remains that. But essentially, as people got transparency over the sector, is for stakeholders in the industry, for universities, for government, for legal firms and investors. They all buy the report. They all get a horizon on what's going on. And so it's really a sort of a map or a directory for those people. So we sell the report, so anyone wanting to buy the report online, just go to our website, just type in Google Tin 100 and you'll end up there. But we've also got a growing franchise with the companies themselves. And so we've started a membership model to engage more deeply with them and making sure that it becomes more transactional rather than I'm trying to support Tin. So we provide those companies with a lot of profile for their involvement, with networking opportunities and data that they can argue their own case with regards to their business growth. So we're looking to build out that's
great, because the networks themselves are incredibly valuable, and I think over the last 20 years, Greg, you've built a pretty impressive network across the sector, and I'm sure some of those featured in the Tin reports have benefited from those connections, and I think it is actually really, really important. If we step back a decade or so, there would have been entities getting started that just had no idea where to look.
Yeah.
And that I think there's a bunch of things that have really developed to create the sort of diverse ecosystem that we have in New Zealand today that supports the startup community, that supports the tech community, and helps facilitate the growth that we're now seeing. And if you pulled all those things away, we just wouldn't have the same level of success. So it is, it's quite important that we keep developing that.
And likewise to the stuff that you're doing, Paul. I mean, I've heard comment that the knowledge wave of 2000 or 2001 was a waste of time and nothing good's happened since. New Zealand today compared with 20 years ago is night and day, and across the country and incubators, angel groups. I was just down at the Angel Association conference last week, collaborative spaces, the EDAs. There's a whole support network that's world-class throughout New Zealand, all over from our provinces through the metropolitan areas. There's an enormous amount of goodwill in terms of large companies looking to help smaller ones and giving free advice. So it's we've spoken a lot about the companies, but I think the point you highlight is incredibly important, that we've got just this incredible ecosystem that's doing all it can to support these companies, which is just a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've got gaps; it's not all there yet, but I think those that are able to fill the gaps, we need to be looking at it. How can we help, and how can we move things forward?
Yeah. So, and if you're looking at sort of, and some of those gaps, two of the biggest gaps have been obviously the people one that we've discussed, in funding. We produce a document that you can download for free from our website on the Investor's Guide to New Zealand Technology Sector that presents a lot of the stuff that's actually in the TIN report, but a case for investing in the tech sector. In the past 3 years, venture capital investment in New Zealand between 2016 and 2018 tripled from 90 million to 270 million. To give you an idea of coming back to, let's talk about the short term, in just 8 deals between October and May this year from foreign companies alone, $336 million was invested.
Wow, that's huge.
So if you say that to someone, they'll say, oh yeah, but what about Rocket Lab? That was probably all of it. So if you take out Rocket Lab, the average deal size for the remaining companies was 17 million. 5 years ago, you got $70 million into your company, you're on the front page of the business section of the Herald. And so there's a growing number of venture capital companies from around the world, but particularly the United States and Australia, are investing in here, in New Zealand, and setting up offices in here. So New Zealand is increasingly recognised as a place where there are attractive deals, but it's also a sign that global capital is becoming more global. So that as a barrier is becoming less and less important. So we've got this just massive upside opportunity as the world discovers this.
Great. Oh, thank you, Greg.
Thank you,
Appreciated
Paul.
having you on the show. Now, a special thank you to the partners of the New Zealand Tech Podcast, Sumo Logic, Vodafone, Spark, Vocus, HP and Samsung. And it's those companies that make this sort of episode possible for us to do these special episodes and take time outside of our usual schedule. So a huge thank you to those companies. And really it's the companies, and some of them aren't New Zealand companies, but they're getting behind what's going on in the New Zealand tech sector in their own way. So
awesome.
Huge appreciation to those. And Greg, so if people want to find you, it's getting online and just Googling Tim 100 or bring up the website.
And phone our office and I'll phone you back. And if you want to buy a report, do that. And for tech companies, sign up to our membership offering on the report. It's all quite clear. And we're welcome any approach, and only too keen to help any company that's looking for assistance in some ways. So thanks for the opportunity.
That's awesome. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And for those that were watching into the live stream, we'll catch you again on the next episode. All right. See ya.
Thank you.